All right, Care Pros, welcome back to another deep dive with the Care Pro. And this one's a bit of a timely one, isn't it? We've got this new budget hot off the presses. And, well, let's be honest, it's left a lot of us in the care sector feeling a bit like we've been handed that metaphorical teaspoon of flour and told to whip up a banquet. The UK social care system's already stretched thinner than a well, you know. And this budget doesn't exactly feel like the lifeline we were hoping for, does it? So today we're going to roll up our sleeves and take a proper deep dive into what this budget really means for care company owners and operators like you. We'll sift through the jargon and try to figure out what it actually means to your bottom line.
I think that's a brilliant way to put it, sifting through the jargon, because
It
on the
does.
surface, there are a few things that look, promising at first glance, like that national living wage going up to £12.21 an hour. Fantastic news for our care workers, absolutely deserved.
Yeah, definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
But, and I think there's always a but lurking around the corner with these things.
Well, there's a big but, isn't there? That elephant in the room. While that wage increase is brilliant news for our workforce, it comes with a pretty hefty price tag for care companies. We're talking about a jump in employer national insurance contributions going from 13.8% to 15%. And for care companies already battling those, wafer-thin margins, that's a serious extra cost.
Yeah, I can practically hear the collective groan from care providers across the country. I bet a lot of you listening right now are thinking, hang on a minute, didn't they announce extra funding for social care? Wasn't that supposed to cushion the blow a bit?
They did. There was an extra $600 million pledged, which on the face of it, sounds like a decent chunk of change, doesn't it?
It does.
But when you actually look at the numbers, the picture's not quite so rosy.
Okay, so let's get into those numbers then.
Well, the Home Care Association, those fantastic folks who are always in our corner, they calculated that there was already a shortfall of $1.08 billion just to cover the previous national minimum wage. And that's before we even factor in this new higher rate.
Right, so we're essentially starting in the red.
Exactly. So realistically, this $600 million is unlikely to even cover the new minimum wage, let alone absorb the increased national insurance contributions on top of that.
So it's a bit like, you know, being given a few extra sprinkles to decorate a cake that's already missing half its ingredients.
Yeah, a few fancy sprinkles don't make up for a fundamentally flawed recipe, do they?
Exactly. And in our case, that missing foundation is the real cost of delivering quality care.
That's it, spot on.
And that's the crux of the issue, isn't it? There's this huge disconnect between what the government's providing in terms of funding and what it actually costs to provide decent care.
Absolutely. And it's a disconnect that's putting immense pressure on care providers, particularly from local authorities who are often squeezing providers to breaking point.
All right, let's dig into that a bit, shall we?
Yeah, let's have a look at some of the research from the Home Care Association. It's pretty eye-opening.
Okay, hit us with the facts.
Well, only 1% of councils are currently paying a sustainable rate for home care. And it gets worse. Some councils aren't even covering the basic costs of employing staff at the minimum wage.
That's just not right, is it?
No, it's not.
And it creates this race to the bottom, doesn't it? Where providers are forced to cut corners or just go under.
Exactly. And it's a race that nobody wins, least of all the people who rely on care.
And this begs the question, if this continues, are we going to end up in a situation where only the unethical, the cheapest providers are the ones left standing? What does that mean for the quality of care? Before we get too deep into that, let's take a step back for a second and zoom out a bit.
Okay.
Look at how this budget fits into the wider picture of social care in the UK.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. It's important to see the bigger context here.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to our dive into this budget. We've been talking about those headline figures, the national living wage increase and those national insurance hikes, and really trying to untangle what they mean for care providers' bottom lines.
Yeah, and I think it's becoming increasingly clear that without proper funding to back them up, these seemingly positive changes could actually backfire. It's a bit like being promised a full English breakfast and ending up with a single sausage and a cold cup of tea.
Oh, tell me about it. We Brits, we do love our breakfast analogies. But yeah, in all seriousness, this funding shortfall is a major concern.
It is.
And it brings us back to that pressure cooker environment that so many care providers are facing, particularly from those local authorities.
Yeah, we touched on this earlier, but it's worth really unpacking this a bit further.
Absolutely. The Home Care Association's research paints a pretty bleak picture.
It does.
Many councils are simply not offering sustainable rates for care services.
We're talking about rates that don't even cover the basic costs of employing staff at the minimum wage, let alone all the other expenses involved in running a care company.
It's a recipe for disaster. And it begs the question, how can care companies possibly deliver high-quality care when they're constantly being squeezed from all sides?
It's a real catch-22, isn't it? Do you accept these low rates knowing that they're unsustainable and put your business at risk? Or do you refuse those contracts and potentially have to let staff go, reduce services, or even close your doors altogether?
It's a no-win situation for many providers, and ultimately it's the people who rely on care who suffer the most.
Absolutely, because let's be honest, quality care can't be delivered on a shoestring budget.
No, it
You
can't.
need to be able to invest in your workforce, provide proper training and support, and cover all those essential overheads.
You need to be able to run a sustainable business.
Exactly.
And when providers are constantly struggling to make ends meet, something's got to give. And
Yeah.
we often see this manifest in things like cutting corners, reducing staff hours, or even compromising on the quality of care.
And none of those are acceptable outcomes. And I think this is what we need to zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. The government talks a big game about prioritizing social care, recognizing its vital role in our society, but their actions don't always match their words, do they?
There's a real disconnect between the government's rhetoric and the reality on the ground.
It's like they're acknowledging the problem with one hand and then pulling the rug out from under us with the other.
And this budget has unfortunately widened that gap. And until that fundamental disconnect is addressed, the social care sector will continue to face these impossible challenges.
Which brings us back to that crucial question. What can we as a sector do to push for the funding and recognition we deserve?
We need to make our voices heard loud and clear. We need to hold the government accountable for their promises and demand better for both care providers and the people who rely on our services.
Absolutely, we can't afford to stay silent. We need to shout from the rooftops about the incredible work that goes on in this sector, the dedication of our care workers, and the difference we make in people's lives.
This isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It's about people's lives, their well-being, their dignity.
Right before we get too carried away with our righteous indignation, let's have a quick recap of the key points we've covered so far. We've looked at the funding shortfall the pressure care providers are facing from local authorities.
We've highlighted how these pressures can lead to a compromise in the quality of care, which is simply not acceptable.
And we've talked about the need for collective action, for making our voices heard and demanding better from the government. Now stick with us because in part 3, we're going to shift gears a bit and explore some potential solutions.
We'll look at what's being done to address these challenges and how we can work together to create a more sustainable and equitable future for social care in the UK.
Because, believe it or not, there is hope on the horizon. We're a resourceful bunch in the care sector, and we've got some brilliant minds working on innovative solutions. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone.
I think we've been through the ringer a bit, haven't we, in this deep dive? All this talk about funding shortfalls and pressures from local authorities and the impact on care quality. It can feel a bit overwhelming, can it?
Yeah. It can. It's easy to feel a bit despondent after all that.
Yeah.
But we're care professionals, right? We're problem solvers by nature.
That's right.
We don't just, sit back and wring our hands. We roll up our sleeves and figure out solutions. So we've had the reality check.
We have.
Now, what about the solutions? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the first thing is we've got to keep the pressure on the government.
Yeah.
We can't let them off the hook. This isn't just about complaining. This is about advocating for what's right, both for care providers and the people who rely on our services.
Absolutely. We need to hold their feet to the fire and demand proper, sustainable funding for social care.
Exactly. We need a long-term funding plan, not just these short-term fixes that create more uncertainty. We need a multi-year settlement that reflects the true cost of providing quality care, one that takes into account those rising costs we talked about, the national living wage, increase the national insurance hikes, the whole shebang.
And kit and caboodle.
Yeah, exactly.
No more sticking plasters. We need a proper fix. And what about those local authorities squeezing providers? What could we do about that?
Well, that's where this idea of a national contract for care comes in.
Ah, yeah. I remember reading about this.
Yeah, it's a bold idea from the Home Care Association.
It is.
But it has the potential to be a real game changer.
Okay. Remind us how that would work.
So basically, it would establish a minimum price for home care services. This would ensure that public sector commissioner, the local authorities, are paying a fair and sustainable rate, one that actually covers the costs of providing quality care.
So it's about taking the race to the bottom out of the equation, preventing those unethical providers from undercutting everyone else.
Exactly. It's about creating a level playing field where quality is valued and rewarded, not penalized.
It sounds like a win-win for everyone involved.
It has the potential to be. But of course, it all comes down to political will, doesn't it? We need those in power to truly understand the value of social care, to see it not as a drain on resources, but as an essential investment in our society.
And that's where we, as a sector, as individual care professionals, need to step up and make our voices heard. We can't wait for someone else to fight this battle for us. We need to be the champions for the people we care for the dedicated care workers who make it all possible.
Absolutely. Every voice matters. Talk to your local MPs, write to newspapers, use social media to get the message out there. Share your experiences, highlight those challenges, and don't be afraid to get a little bit loud.
People power can make a difference. And join forces with organizations like the Home Care Association, who are doing incredible work advocating for positive change in the sector. There's strength in numbers.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, this isn't about abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about real people's lives, their well-being, their dignity. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, has access to the high-quality care they deserve.
So let's leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on.
The future of social care is not predetermined. It's something we shape, something we fight for. We have the power to make a difference.
So let's get out there. Let's make some noise. Let's demand better. Let's create a social care system that truly values care, that supports those who provide it, and that safeguards the well-being of those who rely on it. And don't forget to connect with us, the Care Pro, over on YouTube and Facebook. We're sharing resources, insights, and building a community of passionate care professionals. Join us. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep caring afash.